So, hi everyone. I'm Seth Adrian Romo from Pages and Panels, and today I'm excited to be talking with Sammy DeMonster, uh, influencer extraordinaire for comic books. So, a little bit about Sammy. Sammy is a comic book influencer whose reviews and coverage of comic books has created a dedicated following on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And their approach and keen eye for creator-owned and self-publishing titles has made Sammy a trusted voice. And Sammy collaborates with a lot of major publishers, such as Boom Studios. So, Sammy, we're here to talk about your journey, indie comics, trends, all that jazz. Thanks for stopping by today. How are you?
Oh, great. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that lovely intro. I'm honored to be here.
Awesome, awesome. Well, let's get right into it. So, as always, the good question is, what's your comic book origin story? How did you get into the medium? Where did it all start?
Yeah, I always love that question. It's such a fun story. Yeah, I've always been nerdy my whole childhood. I grew up as a just a nerdy tomboy. I loved dressing up, and back in the day, I was in the Harry Potter fan club. I was a very big Spider-Man fan with the Tobey Maguire movies. One Halloween, I actually dressed up as Spider-Man with all the muscles in the suit because I really wanted the six pack for some reason. And my mom wanted to put some spider lace on the trim, so it was like a little bit more feminine to kind of embrace my feminine side and my masculine side. And all the guys at school were like, "Why do you have muscles? You're a girl." And I was like, "I'm gonna beat you up. That's why." So always drawn to superheroes. And growing up in the early 2000s, Nickelodeon had a lot of cartoons and Cartoon Network. So I was drawn to the DC ones like Teen Titans. And then, yeah, I would read comics here and there. And then in high school, I was picking up trade paperbacks at Barnes and Noble. I think my first one was Teen Titans: A Child's Game. I think that's what it's called. And then my second one that really got me into comics was Supergirl, Girl of Steel, which honestly, I don't feel like it holds up as much for me personally. But yeah, that's how I got into it. And then I was cosplaying a little bit in high school before it was like really a word that people knew. So people were like, why are you going all out for Halloween? And then I was just trying my best to navigate the world as like as a nerdy girl. I wanted to discover more. So yeah, and then I just started cosplaying, and then I started reading more. And then in lockdown, I was reading even more. I like
Mhm.
subscribed to the DC Comics app and was like going out of my way. So it just increased steadily over time. Actually, this is funny enough. Right next to me, I have my graduation cat from high school, and it's just a collage of female superheroes. So that's just this was my graduation day, just
That's
representing all the
awesome.
superhero girls. Literally in the middle here, Supergirl Girl Steel with her little tattoos. Such a fun time.
That's awesome. Yeah, no,
Thanks.
I think that's great. And I feel like for a lot of people, lockdown is really like where comic book fandom skyrocketed. I've been doing a series of interviews and with people who are doing creator-owned titles or self-publishing. The common, I guess, talking point I hear is, well, during the pandemic, I wanted to get into comics or make comics. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense that we're in this sort of golden age of indie comics now because people kind
Absolutely.
of had time. Yeah,
Absolutely.
so
It's a,
you talk about DC, but you primarily focus on indie titles, or at least I notice it's a lot of your coverage. How did you kind of grow more focus on that? I mean, what was the indie title that kind of helped you see, hey, there's more beyond Marvel and DC? Because I feel like for a lot of us, we start off with Marvel and DC, and then we find a title and we're like, oh, this is interesting. So what was that like for you?
absolutely. I started off with DC. I'm a DC fan for sure. I don't really know much about Marvel, to be honest with you. I think even in the beginning of my comic journey, a lot of the DC titles I was drawn to were kind of independent, isolated comics. Like
Hmm.
I love DC Bombshells, and I think there are kind of indie comics within DC in a way, like the Black Label. So I was really drawn to these one-off stories, and it wasn't until I actually got a job at a comic shop that I was exposed to a bit more indie comics, and I was drawn to that. And I think one of the best things about indie comics is that you don't have to know decades of lore to enjoy these titles. Um, yeah, can I share with you my origin story of how I got hired at a comic shop and how that
Yeah.
like brought me? And because that it's all kind of relevant on like how it just made me more of a fan. I was at like an area with a bunch of stores. Pretty soon after lockdown, I was looking for a job, and I was walking around. I had an interview at a different store. I don't even know what it was, and the interview went okay. I was like, I don't really know if I want this job. Me and the interviewer didn't really vibe. Like, I'm sure if I emailed them, like they would give me the job, but I was like, I don't think I want it. And I had been running late to the interview, but I wasn't late. But I had my resume with me because I always have an extra copy so they could look at it with me.
Mhm.
And I didn't have my bag with me because I was running late. So I was just holding this piece of paper. I was like, man, I don't want to hold this piece of paper, but I don't want to throw away my resume. So I walked in the comic shop right next door and I was like, are you guys hiring? And they're like, no. I was like, okay, well, can I give you my resume? And they're like, sure, I guess. And they did end up calling me in because pretty soon after somebody put in their notice and they called me in and I got the job. And I had been nerdy, I was familiar with DC and I read comics, but I always read trade paperbacks and digital. So I was really excited to like really learn more about comics. So this was the first time I was picking up single issues monthly. I worked there, so obviously I was like basically a pool customer at a pull list. And so just working in this atmosphere and looking at all the new titles coming out and being surrounded by comics and being around a lot of other like female nerds at the comic shop, I was just getting exposed to these indie comics. And I was like, I really like this more actually. Don't get me wrong, I love superheroes so much, but there's something about indie. There's just obviously more possibilities because DC and Marvel are confined to being in the genre of superheroes, but indie comics is anything. And I always
Mhm.
tell this to people want to get into comics. Anything that can be a TV show, movie, or a book is a comic and can be a comic. So it's just there are more just genre options. But that's how I got in the comic shop, and that's how I got exposed to indie titles. And then I just started leaning into it. And then Boom Studios quickly became my favorite publishing company. I loved
Mhm.
all the stuff they were putting out. It was easy also to transition because they put out like Buffy the Vampire Slayer comics, so I was familiar with a few of the IPs that they have. And then I ended up leaving the comic shop because I just retail is pretty rough if you're not
Mhm.
exactly social. So I
Retail
was
is retail regardless of what it is.
exactly. I love the shop. One of the best jobs ever. Love that shop. I still go there. Love the people, but it's just exhausting. And oh gosh, yeah, retail is retail. So I was leaving and I was sad because one of my favorite aspects was getting people into comics for the first time. I'm like,
Mhm.
listen, I can help you find your first comic book, especially women and like little girls who are intimidated because it's a male dominated field. And that was one of my favorite aspects. And so I was like, maybe I'll make a couple of videos so I can recommend comics because I'm gonna miss that. So I put out like 3 videos on my TikTok, and I had not touched my TikTok in a year. I had like 9,000 followers. I was making lesbian TikTok content before, deleted it for a year, brought it back to make comic content, and I put out like 3 videos. It was DC Pride, Grimm, and maybe one other, and they
Mhm.
got like 20 likes each. And I was like, okay, whatever. It doesn't matter. I don't care. I'm not gonna make any more videos. And then DC Comics reached out to me to do a campaign with them for DC Pride, and this right away. And I was like, oh my god, like maybe I should take this seriously. Doing a campaign with DC Comics for DC Pride is a dream come true. So then I started taking it more seriously, and then I started reviewing more, and I got into the groove of things, and I just kept being consistent. And then I started like getting more into indie comics, and I really like Boom. And Boom was the first company that I emailed asking to be on their review list. So they would send me a review books once in a while, and
Mhm.
that kickstarted my relationship with them as well. And it just got me more into indie comics because consistently I was just going out of my way to review indie comics. Like 8 Billion Genies was one of my biggest videos at first. And so just all that exposure at the indie comic shop and just being a new reader. I started reading in high school. That was like the 2000 teens. So it's hard to catch up on Dickens lore. So if I'm starting at this point, which is New 52, it's intimidating as a new reader. So that's why I was drawn to indie comics because I could just jump into an issue 1 or a volume 1, and that could be the whole story, or they're just contained stories. So that's how I got into it.
No, I think that's great. Yeah, I kind of like you. I'm more of a DC head. I mean, all respect
Mm-hmm.
to Marvel, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like I'm the biggest comic book reader like in my household. Well, my little one, she's too young to read, but like I'll share
No.
an indie title with my wife and she will absolutely love it.
Yeah.
But if I were to give her a DC title, she would still obviously appreciate it, but it's just the fact that like there's so much history behind it that like there's this baggage with legacy characters that I get excited because I'm like, oh, they're kind of referencing this thing from like 10 years ago, and it's like, oh, that's really cool, and I'm just like, oh yeah, like, but okay, I guess that's kind of where the conversation stops. But when I've given her indie titles, she's loved them. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the big thing is, when you're introducing indie titles to, non-comic readers, um, they people tend to get more excited because they don't have to know the
Yeah.
history of like something that happened 50 years ago, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's very intimidating, even for someone like me who I would consider a seasoned reader. I always use the anecdote of I picked up a issue of Spider-Man and like in the blurb it was like, "Oh, as what happened in like issue 142." And I'm
Yeah.
like, "How am I supposed to know that?" Like you
Yeah.
expect me to go track that issue down? It probably costs a lot now, one. And two, like I feel like it just takes you out of the story. So no, I completely get that. So as you've covered, these indie titles, which one really kind of drew you in the most at the beginning,
Ooh,
to kind of do more coverage of indie titles?
that is a great question. Also, I like to say I totally relate. My girlfriend at the time, who's now my ex, getting her into DC was so hard, but the indie comics very digestible and more genres for her. So it is intimidating. So I
Hmm.
love that. Um, gosh, that's a hard question. What did I gotta look behind me here. What got me into it? The Many Deaths of Layla Starr was definitely one of the not the earliest, but like on the earlier side where I'm like, I love this title. This is
Hmm.
fantastic, fantastic. I was actually late to the game for Something Is Killing the Children, but that's my favorite ongoing series.
Oh, that's a great one. That's a great one.
Yeah, it's so good. I'm trying to remember like what did I read at first that got me into indie comics. Ooh, Paper Girls. That was really good. That was really exciting. Oh man, I don't remember what I was reading at first, but that's an excellent question. But honestly, a lot of the boom titles going on at the time really, really drew me in. That's just boom. They're my favorite.
Yeah, Boom is pretty awesome. I do feel like I tend to like be more of a Boom reader. But and they're also just as a company great to collaborate with.
Mhm.
Side note, the reviews that I do, I'm on the press list, and
Mhm.
working with them is like compared to other publishers, I won't name names. It's so much easier and they're so much more down to earth, which is really nice.
Yeah.
So there's the Boom plug for anybody who watches this in the future.
Yeah.
Hi, future people. Boom's great.
Boom's
Um,
great. Oh yeah, I was on the press list too originally, and yeah, they're so nice. And then Image Comics would be my second favorite,
yeah, Image
but
is
their
great.
titles are almost tied, to be honest. Ooh, yeah, I wish I could remember more of what got me into indie comics. The Many Deaths of Layla Starr was definitely one of the earlier ones. I remember being really excited about that, my comic shop, and talking about it a lot. I wish I remembered more,
It's all
but
good. So,
Paper Girls.
you've kind of made this transition from like the just the basic reader to like kind of influencer, and you said you started out with like, or at least relatively started out with like 9,000 followers, and since then your platform has grown. How has that journey been like, especially considering you are focusing more on indie titles, which a lot of influencers that I've seen that sometimes have those numbers, 10 to 1 have to cover every single pop culture fandom, which
Yeah,
to me, I don't know how they do it. Much respect
yeah,
to them.
yeah,
Or they primarily focus on the big two because oftentimes people assume that Marvel, DC, again, no disrespect, but Marvel and DC is where the audience is. But clearly
yeah.
you've made a platform focusing on indie titles. So how has that journey been like, and how are you kind of viewing that growth in general?
Yeah, that's an excellent question and really good analysis. Because I do struggle with that, where I see that where the numbers are people talking about more pop culture stuff in the big two, and I ask myself a lot, like I have to ask myself sometimes, am I making this content because I think it's going to get me more views and attention that will help grow the things I actually want to talk about? Sometimes I do stuff that I'm like, yes, I want to talk about this because people like it. But then I have to ask myself, am I just talking about this because I think it's what they want to see? And if that's
Mhm.
the question, the answer is yes. I try not to talk about things just because. I also specifically, I don't talk about Marvel because I'm not a fan, and I know I could go out of my way and find titles I like and talk about it, but I do think there's an oversaturation of Marvel
Mhm.
in the comic industry, and there are already so many voices who are way more equipped to talk about it. So I'm here to talk about what I love, and that's indie comics and then DC. But it is hard. But back when I was making content for the first time, I saw a lot of steady growth. The algorithm has changed a lot. It's constantly changing, and now with TikTok Shop, things are so different.
Mhm.
And for sure, like my growth has slowed down on TikTok, and it's not just me, it's other creators too. So it's been difficult to figure out that and just like fight against the algorithm and figure out like a way to keep it fresh but talk about what I want, because it's hard when so many people also send you things that they want you to talk about, because I want to promote titles and get voices out there, but I also want to focus on what I like. So it is difficult to find that balance. But the growth is also really exciting because it's more opportunities to talk to people and just people reaching out and asking me to review their comics has had me discover so many new titles. but the growth is hard. And for anybody who's listening or watching and is dealing with that, just know that it does take a while. It's not you, and the algorithm is constantly changing, and the key is just consistency and being authentic with yourself, which is something I actually do struggle with sometimes. I feel like I want to be so polished, and I'll re-record the same line a few times so I don't like maybe stutter or say too much, and I feel like I'm getting too polished at times, and sometimes I got to slow down and be like, Sammy, just talk to the camera. You don't have to be perfect. Just talk to the camera and just have fun. So for me, that's also a balance that I am trying to find. Not being too perfect and polished with my content, and just letting the words flow, even if I'm stuttering and saying like and because people just want a conversation, even
Hmm.
if you obviously the watcher can't answer you. It's all about a conversation, and it's hard for me because I have a background in graphic design and editing, and like I'm a trained actor, so I want to be polished, but also I'm like just relax, just chill out, and it doesn't have to be perfect. So that's something I'm also figuring out as well as I'm trying to figure out how to have steady growth. So it's just constantly an uphill battle.
So you probably read tons of titles, and like you said, I imagine you get lots of people saying, "Hey, can you check out my comic?" How
Mm-hmm.
do you find that balance between one, just getting through what I imagine is a giant backlog of titles to review,
Oh yeah.
and also just kind of focusing on like titles that maybe you want to showcase more, maybe, because it's a specific type of creator. Like, how do you kind of navigate that, considering again, thousands of followers? I'm sure you get emails all the time from people saying, "Hey, can you check out my comic?" What is that like? How do you manage that?
That is also an excellent question. It is true. I do get a lot of comics from very small creators asking for me to review the comics, and I feel bad because I cannot answer the emails. There's kind of a lot of emails constantly from also just a lot of TikTok shop people, which I do not like. I get like random emails daily from like, we want you to review our vacuum cleaner. We want you to review our dog thing. I don't have a dog. So it's just there's so many emails and so many people who want me to like reach out and want me to review it. And I feel bad. I just don't have the bandwidth to answer every single email, and I just don't have the time or the energy to do it. And I actually had to take a step back from saying yes to all these reviews because I just felt like it was driving my content too much. Like I was just reviewing things people were asking me for, and I just had to start saying no. So I'm kind of in this place right now where I'm saying I'm in kind of in a hard no right now. And
Hmm.
I'll go through seasons where I'll say yes again for a bit for some titles, but it is really hard to find that. I feel really bad because I want to be able to look at everybody's comics, but I just can't do it. And then I get sent some comics in the mail from like publishing companies, and they send me them to review, and sometimes I just won't get around to it. Sometimes I won't get around to it for like a year, to be honest.
Oh, wow.
um I know. I mean, I think when you send somebody a package for a PR list, they know that you might not talk about it. Because also sometimes I read stuff and it's not for me, so I'm not gonna want to talk about it on my channel. And so I feel bad too because they sent me this comic, but I don't want to like lie to my people because I'm like it wasn't for me. Sometimes I'll review something and I'm like it was objectively fine, even though if it's not my favorite, so that's fine. But sometimes I just can't talk about them because I just don't have the time to read it. I couldn't get myself to read it, or I just didn't like it. I'm also like a mood reader with ADHD, so it is really hard to actually find that balance and navigate my ADHD and figure like there are things that I'm like, oh well, someone just gave me this comic and I want to read it, but I'm not in the mood for that. I'm in the mood for this comic that I bought 2 years ago that I
Hmm.
haven't read. So it is something I actually really greatly struggle with. And there's definitely some guilt that comes with that because I want to be able to do it. So if anybody's, listening or watching and you send me your comic, I will probably get around to it at some point. I'm so sorry. It's just hard. And then, I work for Boom Studios doing their weekly new comic book day videos. So my priority every week has to be those new titles. And then any company that reaches out to collab, and it's like a paid partnership also has to be bumped up more than priority
Hmm.
because there are deadlines that come with that. And then I also want to talk about things that I want to talk about that I'm interested. Maybe I'm hyper fixated on like cyberpunk for like the 2 weeks and I'm really into the series, a series that has to do with that genre. So it's really also this is like I think a term they use when creating video games, but it's kind of follow the fun. So I try to do that. I don't want to just read comics and make content on stuff people send me just because like I want to find what I'm interested in. If I'm hyper focused on Baldur's Gate 3 and I want to read a bunch of D&D type content, that's what I'm going to talk about for that month. And people are going to relate because I'm just being myself and being authentic. So it's a very hard balance for sure. I'm still figuring that out.
So with the titles that you are able to get around, because there's only so many hours in a day,
Yeah.
um, from your perspective, as somebody who's probably read a lot now, what do you consider makes a good title in general? What does a good comic to you look like?
I think I think a good comic has a lot of factors, and they're definitely it is all very personal as well. But I think this is what someone said once to me about horror movies is that it just can't be boring. Like
Mm,
if the comic's bad and silly, at least it should be exciting. Or if it's like really intense, it should at least be interesting. And that's what it should be, just not boring. Like and for me, I'm very drawn to like specific genres and characters and like ways of storytelling, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad. There are comics that I've read that I'm like, that was great. Wouldn't read
mm,
it again. Not my style, but I know it's great. And then there are comics that I'm like, this is a little bit silly and campy, but I loved it. So it's finding that balance too and trying to be objective. But I'm not a neutral party. I talk about comics that I like for sure. But a good comic for me is just exciting, really well developed characters, good lore. And if you're not going to have good lore, then it should be character driven. Anything that just makes a good story in general. It's just across all platforms. What makes a good movie? What makes a good video game? What if it holds my intention and has characters that I could really relate to, then I'm going to be drawn to it. If you have an emotional connection too, I think that takes you even further. For example, something that's killing the children is exciting. It has good lore, and it reads like a movie, and it's just
mhm,
really dialogues really well. But I think what has kept me having this close connection with this comic series is that Erica Slaughter is such a dynamic character.
mhm.
And so I have like an emotional connection to her. And I think that's also what creates really loyal readers.
Yeah, she really is probably one of the best comic book characters on stands right now.
Yeah.
I love that series. It's definitely grown a lot from where it first started.
Oh, yeah.
I won't spoil anything, but what James Tynion's doing right now, for anybody who watches this, kind of giving those kind of anthology-based backstories, it's been really fun because I'm like, okay, you already kind of know a little bit about the character. You get to enjoy more of just like this one-off story. But yeah, I would say that she's pretty awesome. Actually, we went to a Comic-Con back in May, and my daughter, she's not even 2 yet, but we cosplay her as Erica Slaughter. It was awesome. Like we had a
Oh my
bandana
God.
and everything. Yeah, I know. I'm excited for when she gets older and I could be like, "Hey, this was you. How cool are you, huh?"
Yeah. It's gonna be Netflix, so she's gonna be like, yeah, I cosplayed that before. It was cool.
Exactly, exactly. She knew about it before it was cool.
Yeah. Well, please send me those pictures. That's so cute.
Yeah. So as someone who, like you said, you have the reviews that you have to do because of, collaborations with studios like Boom and Vault. What sort of trends have you been noticing in the indie comic book community? I feel like for a while horror was kind of everybody's go-to
Mm.
genre, but as someone who's reviewing it, what are you kind of seeing as trends of, either storytelling type, art design, anything like that? What have you kind of noticed from these different publishers?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. I think I'm noticing people who are trying to really be outside of the box.
Mm,
People, you said earlier this is a golden age for indie comics, and I completely agree. I think that there are way more voices out telling these stories. I think comics have gotten bigger for multiple reasons. I
mhm,
think the EU is a part of that, and like having more time in lockdown. So people are definitely this is a golden age. Comics are so big. There's so many stories out there, and so many people are pushing the boxes. I mean, I just think that like Vault just put out recently a comic about simulation theory and like a girl realizing she's literally like in a simulation. Like that's so unique, you know. And I think just
is that Beyond Real? Is that the
yeah,
one?
oh yes,
Yeah.
thank you. I forgot the name of that for a moment. Like that's so pushing the boundaries. It's something is killing the children with its ever expanding lore. It's just so ambitious.
Hmm.
Um, I think a trend I'm seeing is creating these self-contained universes outside of the big two. But that's probably been going on for a while. I mean like Image has a bunch of ongoing series, but like the Mastiverse are
Hmm.
these this ongoing series, but that it's kind of designed so you can kind of jump into any bit of it and not need the whole thing. So people are trying to establish these worlds without having you have to read everything like the big two, like the Mastiverse. Something is killing the children. It's an ongoing series, but like once again, like there's only like a couple spin-offs, and you could read some of them by themselves. Like if you understand like kind of the basic concept after volume one. So I'm seeing these pushing the boundaries with the boxes and trying to create these expanding stories and universes, but not overwhelming the reader, which I think is a really good path to take. It just really is a golden age for so many reasons. I mean, people I think forget about the Comics Code Authority,
Hmm.
how that was full on censorship for the comic community, and the last two publishing companies, which I think was DC and Archie, left in 2010, which is relatively recent, And so I'm for sure a modern reader. I find my voice and myself represented in modern texts. And so I get sometimes comments from people being like, comics were good back then, back in like this era. And it's like the era of the Comics Code Authority, which is fantastic. I know there's really great titles, but for me, I just don't see myself in that era. And then on top of that, if I'm getting into comics when I'm in high school in the 2000 teens, that's where I'm going to start reading comics, which is like right at the edge of New 52 and the beginning of Rebirth and all these indie titles. So I'm a modern comic reader, and I think it's because there are just so many more voices out there, and I don't have to
Hmm.
catch up with the lore. I know I kind of went off topic there for the question, but that is for sure a difficult question. There are so many different things that indie comics are doing right now. It's really fantastic, and I'm seeing also an influx of, I think, well, I don't know if it's an influx because once again I'm a newer reader, but I'm seeing a lot of musicians and actors getting into writing comics. And I see
Hmm.
a lot of people who work in the movie industry and TV industry as writers also writing comics. And I think that's fantastic. I interviewed Patton recently. I asked him, what's it like writing comics, especially dialogue as an actor? Because he knows what it's like to deliver dialogue. And he said that
Hmm.
I can't remember what he said. I think he said that it for sure like helped him understand like how things are going to sound, if I remember correctly. But it's just cool to see how it's all connected and how it's just such an important way to tell stories. And there are so many different levels to it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the comic book community can be incredibly toxic,
Yeah.
which is really frustrating because I do feel like there's a comic book out there for pretty much anyone. So I feel like even if it's a title that you don't particularly like, there's probably something out there that you will like. So you don't have to get all hung up just because you don't feel like everything's made for you.
Yeah,
Um,
people get that. Just because it's not for you doesn't mean that it can't exist.
exactly.
It's like I don't like wearing the color blue. And I think it's the same concept as if I went to Target,
Mhm.
looked on the rack and saw a blue t-shirt. I'm like, they shouldn't even make this blue t-shirt. I don't like blue. They shouldn't even make this blue t-shirt. Blue t-shirt should
Yeah.
not even, that's really crazy behavior. There are multiple comics that I read that I don't like. I have to read so many comics and like a lot of them I don't
Hmm.
like. And I'm like, just because I don't like it doesn't mean it's bad. Sometimes I could objectively tell it's bad. But there are titles where I'm like, I can see why people like that. That's totally great. That's not my genre though, but I'm so happy it exists. Like that's
Hmm.
fantastic. So yeah, so much toxicity, and people just need to realize if it's not for you, that's okay. It's still allowed to exist for others.
So how do you balance kind of maintaining that positivity with your platform? Because that's one thing I've noticed is luckily there is a rise in influencers in different communities. Actually, a while back, I used to be a writer with Comic Watch, great place for comic book reviews.
Nice.
But I interviewed a toy influencer, and he was telling me how it's so hard for him to he's always positive about everything. Like
Mhm.
even if he doesn't really like it, he'll talk about what could be improved, but he'll also talk about what he didn't like. But he talked about how like you know, it's hard because in every group and community, there's a lot of negativity that could pop up. And sometimes those kind of rage videos are the ones that get the most views because that gets everybody riled up. So I noticed in your discussions, you often bring a lot of energy, a lot of excitement. And I imagine maybe not every title that you're discussing is one that you're a major fan of, but you're at least maintaining that excitement because somebody might like it, but how do you kind of balance that and keep that up considering the enormity of, like I said, toxicity that could be in the comic book community?
Another fantastic question. That's excellent. That's a great question. That is something that I have to think about a lot because I read a lot of comics and a lot
Mhm.
of them I don't like, but why waste my energy on talking about things I don't like? There are so many videos talking about how people hate stuff that I
Mhm.
don't when I watch those videos, I mean, sure they're interesting, maybe it's drama, but that's not adding to my life. In fact, I'm just seeing somebody else be negative and it's kind of bringing me down. So I want to add to the space, not take away. And I also am an artist, so I know that people have put like their heart and souls into comics, and I'm not gonna like poop on these comics and make everybody feel bad. And what if I'm talking about a comic that I hate and somebody's like, well, I'm a really big fan, and now I feel like kind of bad that I'm a fan? That's a terrible place to be in. People talk about things I love all the time and how much they hate it, and it doesn't feel good. So I never want to make anybody feel bad. And I know that these negative videos, these rage videos, do attract a lot of attention. And realistically, like I do things that I want as someone who consumes content and comics. I want to be positive. And if I wanted to grow my following more, I would probably make more negative videos and talk about the big two and follow these pop culture trends. But it's a decision I have to make where I'm like, maybe I'll grow less, but I'm not going to be negative. And there are sometimes comics that I have to review or that I do review that I don't love. And sometimes I'll be like, this is great if you're a fan of this, and that, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
for me. I've said that in a few videos. Then I have a little scale I put sometimes. So I have like liked it, loved it, and I'm obsessed with it. That's like a little positive scale I've created. So I'm like, yeah, I liked it. I will not talk about something I don't like. Like if I liked it a little bit, I'll talk about it. And then I try to have that scale. That's once again, the scale's not negative. It's liked it, loved it, or obsessed. And I don't want to be negative for multiple reasons because I also work with these companies, and if I'm talking smack about their comics, they're probably going to be less inclined to work with me. But also, even before I was working with companies, I just don't want to put that negativity out there. Um, and if it's just really bad, then I won't talk about it. There are a few comics that I have talked about that I didn't like, and I'm like, this is good. I won't say I like it. I will never lie. I won't be like, I love this comic. This is great. I'm like, this is what the comic is about. And if you're a fan of this, this, and that, then you might like this. So I'll be very, just very neutral, and I'll put facts out there as well because I don't want to leave people on be like, this is the most amazing comic ever, but I'm getting paid to say it. I have been paid to review comics, and there are some where I'm like, this is about this, this, and that. If you're a fan of this genre, then you might actually like this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's finding that balance there of not making anybody feel bad. Because once again, I talk about comics I like, but I'm also relatively neutral in a lot of ways. So I will oftentimes talk about comics that maybe I don't like, but I know people will.
Mm-hmm.
So my goal is to help people find comics to read, to help new readers get comics, and to just, hang out with other fans and like talk about stuff on like in the comments section. So my goal is to help people find things to like, not dislike, because realistically, as people who consume media, we're gonna dislike the majority of things.
Mm-hmm.
I am a hater. There are so many movies and TV shows and comics I hate. But why would I waste my time thinking about them or talking about them?
No, I think that's well said. So as you are going about exploring titles, finding ones that you like, let's talk about kind of future, right? You consider yourself a newer generation reader. What is it that you specifically want to see more of that you feel like isn't either completely lacking or still needs a lot of, I guess, growth behind it in terms of the comic book industry, whether it's stories or artists or anything, writers? What is it that you, as the next generation of comic book readers, are looking for? What's most important to you?
That is a fantastic question. I want to find fleshed out characters that I could see myself in.
Hmm.
And I think the comic industry is doing really well with representation and all these different voices. I think that's something that is going really well right now. Honestly, from a fan standpoint, it's not even really about the content, but it's kind of how it's advertised. I wish that more companies were talking more about these newer, smaller titles because
Hmm.
if you look at some of the bigger pages, they're not talking about small indie titles coming out or smaller, like the smallest ones. I mean, indie companies, of course, but they're talking about their big IPs and their big titles. I wish that they would focus more on smaller ones, smaller projects, and helping people get into comics for the first time. There are comics that are not even advertised at all that I'll see at my local comic shop. I'm like, wait, that's cool. I wish I saw that. So I wish that there were more efforts on the social media side of things to draw people in more. And I'd love to see more just celebration of comic books in nerd spaces and more interactions with the creative team. For example, like Comic Con is less about comics and it's more about pop culture. So I'd love like just more things focused on comics. And I don't even know what I'm trying to say to be honest, but I just I wish people talked more about the obscure stuff and the newer
Hmm.
stuff instead of the popular stuff to help people get into comics. And but honestly, things are going so well in the comic industry. So many voices are being told, so much representation. People are really pushing the boundaries. I'm really impressed with comics coming out these days.
Yeah, and actually, I would argue that I think that's why people like yourself, who are influencers, are kind of critical to that because, I know you have a backlog of titles that have been sent to you, but a creator I interviewed the other day, John Avinia, I know he sent you some comics, and I
Oh
think
yeah.
it's amazing because influencers such as yourself, um, you can kind of introduce a wide audience to titles they may not have, read otherwise, and so I think that's one good thing about that I'm seeing in the comic book industry is they're partnering with a lot more influencers like yourself who are comfortable with talking with a range of titles that again they aren't the big two. And again, no disrespect to that, but
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have titles that they have characters of diverse backgrounds, of diverse experiences, and these are titles that maybe are a little more slice of life. Maybe it's not end of the world stories, but there's somebody out there who potentially is scrolling through TikTok, sees one of your videos, is like, huh. that sounds like something I'd want to see. And they now get to experience it. So I do think that's one good trend that I've noticed is there's a lot more partnerships with influencers. Um, so, when you're talking to people who maybe aren't into comics and you're recommending an indie title, what are some of the indie titles that you find yourself constantly recommending that you're like, look, you're gonna at least check out one from a comic book store or a bookstore, look for this one.
Absolutely. I'll typically ask them what genres they like, but I will tell them to read like something that's killing the children and like The Nice House on the Lake. Those kind of read like TV shows, so I think they're
Hmm.
really digestible. Um
And James
I'll
Tynan's pretty awesome.
oh, he's so good, so good. Um, The Many Desolate Little Star. I actually brought that to a Secret Santa once, or no, like
Mm.
a white elephant, and that was like the first thing that people were fighting over. I was like,
Oh, that's
yes,
cool.
yeah. So The Many
Yeah, I
Desolate
see you
Little
have
Star.
the hardcover behind you.
Yeah. I was so excited to buy that one. Um,
Yeah,
I'll
and,
do like
Rom V
one
is really cool.
oh yeah, Romby is great. Rare Flavors going on right now is pretty awesome. I like to believe it's in the same universe as The Many Deaths of Layla Starr. Um, I like horror a lot, so I'll be like, oh, check out like Eat the Rich.
Oh, that's another great title.
So it's so good. I read that in like one sitting. I was like, I stayed up late. For DC titles, I'll be like, oh, if you know like a little bit from like watching cartoons as a kid, check out like Batman the White Knight. That's pretty fun. Everybody knows like Batman's basic origin story. I was like, check
Hmm.
out Bombshells if you know like a little bit about the female characters. If you've watched shows, or I'll be like, check out Far Sector with Joe Mullen. So I'll try to recommend some DC titles that are standalone as well. And I'll just try to figure out like what they like. If they like comedies or something cute, I'll be like, yeah, check this. Oh, you want something queer? Like check out um oh, I forgot the name of it, Crowded. So I'll ask them their genres, but I think my go to consistent ones are like Something's Killing the Children, Nice House on the Lake, and I've only read the first two issues of Nice House on the Lake, but I'm like, this is really good though. And yeah, I
Yeah,
think
and
that's it.
he's coming back with Nice House by the Sea, I think. So he's expanding it. So,
Yeah.
it's funny. It's a 12 issue series. I read issues 1 through 11. And I
Ooh.
was like, I'm gonna read issue 12, like I'm gonna make it a whole thing. I'm all excited about it. And I have yet to find time to read it. It's like
Oh,
sitting on my shelf collecting dust. And I'm like, I don't know how it ends. At this point, I'll just wait a little longer till Nice House by the Sea comes out to motivate me. But yeah, I definitely agree with your titles. I think those are all great. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. Like I said, it's always great to talk to people who are heavily celebrating indie titles. I've been on a kick right now interviewing creators, self-publishers, and so one thing I wanted to do was specifically talk to someone like yourself who's celebrating the titles, getting the word out there. So I really appreciate your time, Sammy. Thank you so much.
thank you so much for having me. This was excellent. Really great questions. And yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you again and take care.
You too.